I know this is a bit of a running joke that when I do a case mod, it's not really a case mod, but I mean, I promise there's more going back into it. The problem is with current case design, you remove one panel. Well, in my case, I removed only 2 panels. The other stuff just clips back on. It's just the motherboard tray and the I/O panel. Is that all that makes a case nowadays? Anyway, basically we're going to have the aluminium base panel. It's going to go down here. And then what we're going to do is we can fit the motherboard tray onto that. So that's going to build it up here. And then on top of that, we then put the I/O panel. And that one fits into these default locations. To me, that's pretty fun because it does mean that basically the case will build itself back up very, very quickly. And by the end of it, it will actually look like a stock CTE 750 Air from the outside. It's all going to be the inside that's going to be completely changed. It's just at this stage, it's just a bit of a, well, I mean, it looks like a bit of a joke. Reminds me of doing the 1000D project where we were just left with like a slinky C-shaped thing. Well, how's that? Wibble, wobble, wibble, wobble, wibble, wobble, wibble, wobble. Now, one thing I'm hoping is going to make this build a little bit easier is we shouldn't have to worry about all the fan wiring because I'm going to be using these Thermaltake SWA fans. So these basically have the ability to daisy chain together. The good thing here is I only need to have one cable which comes out of all 3 fans on one side and all 3 on the other side, which should make managing all those cables a lot easier. Now, in terms of the layout, we've got the same stock radiator mounts as the case comes with. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to stick one 420mm on this side, one 420 on that side. The fans are going to be on the outside of the mod itself. So you will be able to access those later on for cleaning. So in my case, I don't want to be faffing about taking apart half of the chassis to be able to do any work in it. I just want to be able to take the fans off. In your own time. In my case, I don't want to be able to take off the radiators and do anything like that to be able to give things a proper clean. So this should help an awful lot just by keeping things stock and accessible from the outside. Just before we get any further, I just wanted to highlight something which I think is really kind of cool. So I've got these circles cut out here for some fans, but the thing is, I don't want the fans to be sitting behind with big ugly square frames. I want them to sit inside these contours. And the idea is the blades are basically going to be flush with the other side of the panel from the inside, which I think will be a really cool look. So how do we achieve that? Well, what I've done is I've removed the exterior frame from these tough fans, and then I've 3D printed an internal frame. So this one basically just straddles from one side to the other, The real ones are going to be made from aluminium. These are just the sort of prototypes I need to test that everything works, and then I'll commit to some proper aluminium ones to finish up the whole mod later on. But for now, these basically just slot in the top, like so, and then the cables will run through the middle over here, and that way, from the inside, everything will look nice and flush. Another fun little detail that I'm really excited to show you are these, which are Praetex DDC heat sinks. Yes, I'm hoping to be able to get these up on my store fairly soon, and the idea is I want everyone to be able to actually buy some parts that I make for once. So I'm just working through the kinks on the final bits and bobs with these, but expect them to hit pretty soon. They'll have their own proper video, and I'll show you the making of some of the details and things, as well as some of the different options, and I'm really excited. But they need to be christened in a project, and I think this is the perfect one to give them a go. Well, I just about got there. It's due for pickup in a few hours, so I've got a little bit of time. I need to pack it all up and make sure it's all nice and safe in its shipping container. But, yeah, that was quite a stretch. I've been up for about 30 hours now, so yeah, I'm really quite feeling it. Obviously, I've still got quite a long way to go. Now, obviously, this isn't the final arrangement. We haven't got the coolant in there. We haven't got the special cabling. It's just got some default stuff in the background. The GPU is not fully connected. So when it comes back from Taiwan and we go through all the little bits and bobs, that's when we'll do a proper fit out, and then we'll do all the cabling, make everything really neat, replace all the 3D printed parts that don't really belong here anymore. And with all that said and done, it should look absolutely fantastic. I mean, it already looks really good, and it's still just playing the default rainbows on the front here. I do love the colors that the Praetex controllers bring. Now, as for what comes next, I actually need to take a few of the things out of this case, so I'm not actually going to be shipping it like this. Most of it's going to be like this. The distro is really, really solid and all that, but I'm going to take the GPU out because it's going to be put on its side, and that's just going to put an awful lot of strain on the mount. I think that's a bad idea. So I'm going to take that out, and I'm just going to bring it myself in person. It's very easy to install, and then I can just do it all when I'm filling up the loop. So I need to get on with doing that and make sure I get this really thoroughly packed so that it can survive the journey. And I guess I'll catch up when it's back. Well, thankfully, the rig made it back safe and sound. More miraculously, is it managed to sit around in my workshop for a year without getting damaged. What do we need to do now? Well, I learned a lot of things when I was assembling it and getting it ready at Computex. So there are a few things that I need to change. So for instance, over here, I need to look at the cabling for all of the controllers, and this whole box here, it was only temporary to begin with, but it was way too small. It doesn't fit all of the controllers with their connectors on. What I hadn't taken into account was how large the USB headers and things are. So we're gonna have to make a new one of those. Likewise, on some of the sections over here, I need to make some new aluminium brackets. I also need to, on the other side, work on the power supply area. Because down here, I found that with the side panel on, I couldn't actually put the blanking plate in front of the power supply. So I'm going to be moving the power supply a bit further into the chassis. I'm going to be remaking this panel over here, and that will give me a lot more space to play with for the controllers that I mentioned earlier. So before we get into all of that, we need to take this whole thing apart and make some assessments. Okay, I totally underestimated how long that was going to take. It's been quite a long time since I last assembled it, so I kind of forgot just how many parts there are in this build. So what I've gone and done is I've gone through each of the main components and made some adjustments in CAD already for some of them, and others I've put labels so that I can come back to them. So for instance, I need to put a few more cable locations on this particular plate over here. I need to widen one of the holes on the main plate. Likewise, I need to look at some of the cable routes in the reservoirs and things over here, certainly for the RGB cables. These are all things that I can edit still, luckily. Nothing is sort of set in stone, so to speak. I've got a few of these components, like this one over here. So this one had a bunch of problems in it. It was offset in a sort of a frustrating way that didn't line up with the case. It's also just a little bit too short and not quite wide enough. So I'm going to be making a new one of these, but bigger. It's going to be deeper, it's going to be wider. That should make a huge difference for all of the RGB controllers and things. This panel over here, it just wasn't quite right. It looked fine in CAD, but the problem is, in real life, you have to deal with physics and things like the wires actually putting pressure on the panels on here pushed this one a little bit further out, and that meant other things didn't quite fit. Now, one thing we need to do is we need to make a metal version of this, and quite frankly, I'm very glad I didn't make one like that to begin with, because again, this is a load of problems as well. It barely fits in. I was very lucky to be able to get it to fit the first time, and it was purely because it's a 3D printed plastic part that I could bend it in. If that had been aluminium, it just would have been stuck. I'm going to be changing some of the dimensions on this so that it can fit into the chassis more easily. Now, one thing which is going to be pretty cool is this. Now, this is at the moment just the 3D printed prototype, but the real one is going to have controls built into it that allow me to change the RGB manually without having to open up anything or press any of the other buttons. You can just go from the side, and I think that's going to be pretty cool. We'll save that for the next part though, because there's a lot of work involved in that. Now, one thing I would like to have a look at maybe doing is seeing to some of this hardware, because I left all this stock, and yeah, Strix boards always look awful, but we can probably do something about that. I might think about maybe stripping the anodizing, either applying some paint or seeing if I can get them anodized with the other parts. We'll have to see, because I don't really know what alloy this is, and it might not anodize as well as the others in the same batch. So we'll see about that. But what would be cool would be to make some memory heat sinks. Now, I already have a prototype for this that I made for the DDR4 versions of this memory, and it shouldn't be particularly difficult to adjust it to DDR5. We'll see about that. Again, they're quite time consuming, but I think they'll just add a really lovely finish to this mod, and the hardware all being stock doesn't seem to sit right with me. It doesn't really make sense when we've got all this other work going into things. Now, on top of that, we also need to get these done, which are the fans. So I mentioned earlier that these are just prototypes, and these are 3D printed. We're going to be making some aluminium versions of these. And also, whilst I'm at it, I'll make some changes because I found that actually it was quite difficult to manage the wires, which I haven't customized yet, but in their current state, I found them a little bit straggly and they need to be held in place. So I'm going to be making some little mechanisms on here that should help with that as well. It might just be a simple case of not putting the countersink on this one and making a little cover that goes on top. It would keep it nice and simple at least, but we'll have to see. With the aluminium ones, it means I'll be able to use the same alloy as the I/O panel, and we can get it all anodized, so it should match up and look really, really clean. That's the goal. I've got my work cut out for me, so I'll see you in the next part. Don't forget, you can also find me over on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure you follow me over there, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and somehow managed to make it all the way to the outro of the video without doing so. Take care, folks, and I'll catch you next time.